Elena couldn't get the image of the construction worker out of her mind. She had met many powerful men in her life, business leaders, politicians, investors who spoke in numbers and strategies, but never someone like him. Jack was different. He hadn't treated her like a billionaire or a trophy. He had treated her like a person. The way he had calmly guided her out of danger that night, without hesitation, kept replaying in her thoughts like a scene she didn't want to end. The very next week, Elena found herself standing at the same construction site. She had told herself it was because her company was investing in the housing project nearby. But deep down, she knew it was something more personal. She wanted to see him again. Jack, on the other hand, had no such plans. To him, Elena was someone from a world so far away from his own that he didn't even consider crossing that line. He had his hands full already, long hours at work, unpaid bills waiting at home, and a little girl who depended on him for everything. Love wasn't even on his list of possibilities. Still, when he saw her walking across the site in her neat heels and tailored suit, his heart gave a small jolt. "Back again?" he asked, wiping the sweat from his forehead as he adjusted his hard hat. His tone was polite but distant. Elena smiled lightly. "Yes. My company is helping fund the affordable housing project here. I wanted to see how it's going." Jack nodded. "Good project. A lot of families are waiting for a place they can actually afford. This could change lives." Elena watched the way his eyes lit up when he spoke about it. He wasn't just working for a paycheck. He cared about the people who would live in those homes. That passion touched her, and she found herself staying longer than she had planned. She listened to him explain the designs, the safety rules, the way he pushed his team to give their best. It wasn't glamorous talk, but to her, it was fascinating. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed more often. Elena started visiting the site regularly. She told herself it was because of the project updates, but every time she saw Jack, she felt that familiar warmth spread inside her chest. She noticed small things about him. The way he laughed with his workers, how he never asked for help but always offered it, and how his rough hands were gentle when he held a blueprint or adjusted a tool. Jack noticed her too, though he tried not to show it. He respected her, but he couldn't ignore the differences between them. She was polished, elegant, with every hair in place. He was often covered in dust, his boots worn out from years of labor. And then there was Sophie, his daughter. Jack's entire world revolved around her, and he was fiercely protective. He didn't want Elena, or anyone else, to get too close unless he was sure. But fate seemed to enjoy testing his resolve. One Saturday afternoon, Elena went to a community event connected to the project. She was there to speak about the importance of affordable housing. But what surprised her most was spotting a little girl running around with her shoes untied, her laughter filling the park. "Sophie, slow down," Jack called, trying to keep up as he carried a box of supplies. The girl giggled and bumped into Elena by accident. Elena steadied her, smiling. "Careful there. You don't want to trip." Sophie looked up with curious eyes. "You're pretty. Are you Daddy's friend?" The blunt innocence of the child made Elena laugh. "I guess I am," she said softly. Jack walked up quickly, embarrassed. "Sorry about that. She doesn't know when to stop talking sometimes." Elena shook her head. "She's wonderful. You must be very proud." Jack's expression softened immediately as he looked at his daughter. "She's my everything." For the rest of the afternoon, Elena found herself watching Jack and Sophie together. Jack might have been rough around the edges, but with his daughter, he was tender, patient, and loving. He tied her shoes, wiped her face when she got messy, and carried her on his shoulders when she got tired. Elena felt something stir deep inside her, a longing she hadn't realized she carried. That night, as she sat in her quiet penthouse overlooking the city lights, Elena thought about what her life was missing. She had the wealth, the power, the success most people only dreamed of, but none of it compared to the warmth she had seen in Jack's world. A world filled with simple joys, with love that wasn't measured in money or status. Jack, meanwhile, lay awake in his modest home, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't deny the way Elena made him feel, but he also couldn't shake the fear. Could a woman like her ever truly fit into his world? And more importantly, Should he even let her try? He had Sophie to think about. He had to protect her from disappointment. Still, when Sophie asked before bed, "Daddy, will the pretty lady come play again?" Jack felt a tug at his heart. He didn't answer right away, but deep down he already knew the truth. Elena was becoming a part of their lives, whether he was ready for it or not. Elena hadn't planned to keep showing up at the construction site, but something about being there gave her a sense of freedom she rarely felt in her corporate world. Surrounded by the noise of drills and the clatter of hammers, she could actually breathe. Here, no one bowed their heads because she was a billionaire. Most of the men barely noticed her at all, except Jack. Jack tried to act like he didn't care, but Elena could tell he did. Whenever she arrived, he'd nod politely, try to keep his distance, and focus on his work. But there were moments he couldn't hide. A small smile would appear when Sophie mentioned Elena's name, or when Elena asked him questions about the building process. He would explain with more detail than he needed to. She could sense that behind his quietness was a man who carried both pride and pain. One afternoon, Elena stood near the edge of the site, watching workers lift heavy beams into place. Jack came over, his hands dusty and rough from work. "This isn't the safest spot to stand," he said, his tone firm. She laughed softly. "You always sound like you're scolding me." He glanced at her, his eyes steady. "I'm just making sure you don't get hurt. You don't belong in places like this." Elena tilted her head. "Maybe that's exactly why I keep coming." Jack didn't respond, but she noticed the way his jaw tightened, like he was holding back words he didn't dare say. Later that week, Elena was invited to speak at a community event connected to the project. She stood before a crowd, her speech polished and professional. She talked about the importance of affordable homes, the need to build communities where families could feel safe and secure. People clapped politely, but what struck her most was seeing Jack in the crowd, holding Sophie's hand. He wasn't looking at her like the others did, not with admiration for her wealth or fame. He was just looking at her. It made her heart beat faster. After the event, Sophie ran up to Elena again, her little shoes tapping against the pavement. "Hi. Daddy says you help build houses. Does that mean you'll build us one too?" Jack quickly caught up, slightly embarrassed. "Sophie." Elena knelt down, smiling warmly at the child. "I think your dad already does most of the building. I just make sure he has the tools and support he needs." Sophie giggled and slipped her small hand into Elena's. That simple gesture shook Elena more than she expected. She had shaken hands with presidents, CEOs, and royalty, but none of those touches felt as pure as the tiny hand of a child who trusted her instantly. As the weeks went on, Elena found herself spending more time not only at the site, but also with Jack and Sophie. It started innocently, helping with the project, attending events, lending resources for community programs. But somehow, it grew into more. One day she joined them for ice cream after work. Another day, she ended up sitting with them at the park while Sophie played on the swings. Jack was cautious. He never asked her for anything, never leaned into her wealth, and always kept his guard up. But Elena noticed how his eyes softened whenever Sophie laughed, and how his entire face relaxed in those moments. It made her realize how rare it was to see genuine love in her own circles. In her world, affection was often tied to contracts, investments, and social gain. With Jack and Sophie, it was different. It was simple, real. One evening, as the sun was setting, Elena sat on a bench at the park while Sophie chased after butterflies. Jack sat beside her, silent for a while. Finally, he said, "I don't know what you're looking for here, Elena, but I can't give you the kind of life you're used to." Elena turned to him, her voice calm. "And maybe I don't want that kind of life anymore." Jack looked at her, conflicted. He wanted to believe her, but the gap between their worlds was wide. He had seen enough to know how quickly people walked away when things got hard. He couldn't risk that for Sophie. But Elena wasn't the type to back down easily. Deep inside, she knew this connection was different from anything she had felt before. She wasn't chasing an image or a deal. She was drawn to the humanity she saw in Jack, the unconditional love in his role as a father, and the way Sophie had unknowingly opened a door to a world Elena never realized she longed for. That night, As she returned to her grand but empty penthouse, Elena whispered to herself, maybe real love isn't about matching worlds. Maybe it's about creating a new one together. Meanwhile, in his modest home, Jack tucked Sophie into bed. She clutched her teddy bear and asked, "Daddy, do you think the nice lady will come again?" Jack brushed a strand of hair from her face and kissed her forehead. "Maybe," he said quietly. But as he turned off the light and stood in the doorway, he couldn't shake the truth. Elena was already in their lives, and part of him wasn't sure if he even wanted to push her away anymore. Elena's life looked perfect from the outside. Magazines showed her on the cover, with headlines about her power and brilliance. News articles praised her sharp decisions that made her real estate empire grow faster than anyone else's. At charity galas, she stood tall in glittering gowns, smiling for the cameras while people whispered about her success. To the world, she was untouchable. But when the lights went out and she was alone in her penthouse, the silence pressed down on her chest like a weight. The space was too big, too cold. No laughter filled the halls. No warm voices called her name. Some nights she sat by the window, staring at the city skyline, asking herself if all this wealth really meant she had won. She had everything money could buy, yet inside, she felt like she had nothing at all. Jack's life, on the other hand, was the opposite. From the outside, it looked simple. An ordinary man with a modest home, a steady job, and a daughter who adored him. But behind the steady routine was a constant battle. Bills piled up faster than his paychecks. His old truck needed repairs he couldn't afford. He often skipped meals, so Sophie would never notice there was enough food. The hardest part wasn't the money, though. It was the loneliness. Jack had lost his wife years ago, and though he never spoke much about it, the wound never truly healed. His life became all about Sophie. She was the reason he worked so hard, the reason he smiled at the end of each exhausting day. But sometimes, when Sophie was asleep, Jack sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, wondering if he was enough. Could he give her the future she deserved? It was during one of Elena's visits that she noticed the lines of worry on Jack's face. They were walking through the half-finished houses when she asked softly, "Do you ever take a break?" Jack gave a small laugh. "Breaks don't pay the bills." She tilted her head, studying him. "And what about you? Don't you deserve some time for yourself?" He shrugged. "I don't really think about me anymore. My life is Sophie. That's enough." Something about the way he said it touched her deeply. Elena admired his strength, but she could see the tiredness behind it. She wished she could take some of that weight off his shoulders, but she knew Jack would never accept help easily. One Sunday afternoon, Elena found herself at Jack's home for the first time. She had offered to drop off some paperwork related to the housing project, but Jack insisted she stay for dinner. It was nothing fancy, just pasta and salad, but Elena had never enjoyed a meal more. Sophie told silly stories about school while Jack listened patiently, correcting her when she exaggerated too much. The warmth in the little kitchen was unlike anything Elena had felt in years. After dinner, Sophie wanted to show Elena her drawings. She pulled out crumpled sheets of paper filled with colorful houses, trees, and stick figures holding hands. Elena's heart softened as Sophie pointed at one picture. "That's me and Daddy. And that's you. You're smiling." Elena blinked in surprise. "You drew me?" Sophie nodded proudly. "Because you're Daddy's friend. And maybe you'll be mine too." Jack quickly tried to change the subject, embarrassed, but Elena couldn't stop smiling. That simple drawing made her feel seen in a way no boardroom applause or magazine cover ever had. Later that night, as she sat in her car before driving away, Elena thought about Sophie's innocent words. A child had already welcomed her in, without judgment, without conditions. That kind of acceptance was rare, and it scared her because she wasn't sure she knew how to hold on to it without breaking it. Jack, meanwhile, was struggling with his own thoughts. He appreciated Elena's kindness and the way Sophie lit up whenever she saw her. But the more involved Elena became in their lives, the more he worried. What if she got bored of this simple life? What if she decided one day that they were too small for her world? Jack couldn't let Sophie get attached only to watch her heart break. Yet, despite all his fears, he couldn't deny the truth. Elena's presence was changing something in him too. For the first time in years, he caught himself imagining a life that wasn't just about survival. A life where he didn't carry everything alone. A life where maybe, just maybe, love was possible again. That night, both Elena and Jack lay awake in their separate worlds. Hers full of wealth, but empty of warmth. His full of love, but heavy with burden. Neither could stop thinking about the other. Both were afraid. Both were curious. And slowly, without either of them realizing it fully, their hearts were moving closer, pulled together by an invisible thread neither money nor fear could cut. The more Elena visited the project site, the harder it became to deny the pull she felt toward Jack and Sophie. It started with short conversations at work, then turned into shared lunches, and before long, she was spending entire afternoons with them. Every time she thought she could step back, something small would happen that drew her in even closer. A smile from Sophie, a laugh from Jack, or the peaceful feeling she got when she was with them. One Friday evening, Elena stopped by the site after a long meeting. Most of the workers had already gone home, but Jack was still there, finishing up. His shirt was covered in dust, his hair messy, but his energy was calm and steady. "You don't ever stop, do you?" Elena asked, walking toward him with a small smile. Jack looked up, a little surprised to see her. "Someone's got to make sure this place doesn't fall apart." She tilted her head, amused. "Do you ever take a break?" He leaned against a wooden beam and shrugged. "Breaks don't put food on the table." Elena studied him for a moment. He said it casually, but she could see the truth in his tired eyes. Without thinking, she blurted, "Come on, let me buy you dinner." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Dinner? Like together?" "Why not? Even construction workers deserve a night off," she teased. He chuckled, but shook his head. "I can't just leave Sophie alone." Elena hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Then bring her along." "I'd like that." That was how Elena found herself sitting in a small family restaurant that night, across from Jack and Sophie. It wasn't one of her usual fine dining places with polished silverware and men in suits. The tables were simple. The air smelled of fresh bread and pasta sauce, and the waitress knew Jack and Sophie by name. Sophie chattered excitedly, telling Elena about school projects and how she wanted to be an artist when she grew up. Jack listened with a quiet smile, occasionally correcting her or asking questions. Elena barely touched her food, too busy watching the way father and daughter interacted. She had been to countless dinners, surrounded by powerful people, but this simple meal felt richer than all of them combined. After dinner, they walked Sophie home, and Elena noticed how different Jack's world was from hers. His neighborhood was modest, with kids playing in the streets and neighbors greeting one another warmly. It was noisy, messy, alive. Elena realized she couldn't remember the last time she even knew the name of the person living next door to her. As weeks turned into months, Elena and Jack began spending more time together outside of work. She joined them for picnics in the park, where Sophie would run around while Jack and Elena talked. They went to a local fair, where Elena laughed like a child when Jack convinced her to try the Ferris wheel. She even joined them at Sophie's school play, sitting proudly beside Jack as they cheered for her. Jack, though still cautious, found himself slowly opening up. He told Elena stories about his late wife, how they had met, how hard it was to lose her, and how Sophie was the reason he managed to keep going. Elena listened without judgment, her heart aching for the quiet pain he carried. In return, Elena began to share pieces of her own life she rarely revealed to anyone. She talked about the loneliness of success, about how people only saw her money and not her heart. She admitted that sometimes she wished she could disappear from it all and just live simply, without cameras or constant demands. Jack listened, his eyes steady and kind, and for the first time in years, she felt like someone truly understood her. One afternoon, Elena came over to Jack's house to drop off some documents, and Sophie begged her to stay for dinner again. Elena hesitated. She had a board meeting to prepare for, but one look at Sophie's pleading eyes made her smile. "All right, but only if I get to help cook." Jack raised his eyebrows, amused. "You? Cook? That I've got to see." Elena laughed. "Don't underestimate me. I can follow a recipe." That night, she found herself standing in Jack's small kitchen, stirring sauce while Sophie sat on the counter, handing her ingredients. Jack teased her when she nearly dropped the salt, but she didn't care. For once, she wasn't the billionaire CEO. She was just a woman, cooking dinner with people who made her feel at home. As they sat down to eat, Sophie announced proudly, "This is the best dinner ever, because we all made it together." Elena's heart swelled at those words. She looked at Jack, who gave her a small smile that said more than words ever could. The connection between them was undeniable now. It wasn't just attraction or curiosity. It was something deeper. Elena found herself thinking about Jack and Sophie when she was in meetings, wondering what they were doing. Jack caught himself looking for her car at the construction site, hoping she'd show up. Still, there were moments of hesitation. Jack worried about the attention Elena's world might bring. He knew that if word spread, the media would tear them apart. Elena, too, feared what people would say. Her board of directors already criticized her personal choices, and the press would love to make headlines out of a billionaire falling for a single dad construction worker. But every time she saw Sophie smile or heard Jack's laugh, Elena realized she didn't care. For the first time in her life, she was beginning to understand that love wasn't about status or appearances. It was about feeling safe, feeling seen, and feeling alive. One evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, Elena and Jack sat outside on the porch. The night air was cool, and the stars shone above them. They didn't speak for a while, just sat in silence, comfortable in each other's presence. Finally, Elena whispered, "Do you ever think maybe life gives us second chances when we least expect them?" Jack looked at her, his eyes soft. "Maybe. But the question is, do we take them?" Their eyes held for a long moment, and though no words were spoken, both knew something had shifted. Their worlds were colliding, blending in ways neither had planned, but both were starting to hope. For a while, everything felt perfect. Elena, Jack, and Sophie had fallen into a rhythm that almost felt like family. They laughed together, shared meals, and built memories in the simplest ways. Elena would sometimes catch herself smiling at random moments, realizing she hadn't felt that kind of happiness in years. Jack, too, though still careful, found himself looking forward to her visits, even if he tried not to admit it out loud. But peace never lasted long when it came to Elena's world. One morning, she woke up to her phone buzzing with notifications. Headlines blared across news sites, billionaire heiress seen dining with construction worker. Photos had been snapped of their dinner at the family restaurant, and gossip columns were quick to speculate. Was it just a fling? Was Elena trying to play charity with her personal life? The comments were cruel, mocking the idea that someone of her status could ever be serious about a man who wore a hard hat instead of a suit. At her office, board members were waiting with disapproving looks. One of them cleared his throat and said, "Elena, with all due respect, this situation could damage your image. Investors are watching. Our partners expect professionalism, not tabloid drama." She sat quietly, letting them talk, but her chest tightened. They didn't see Jack the way she did. To them, he was just a headline waiting to be twisted. Meanwhile, Jack had his own storm to deal with. At the construction site, his co-workers teased him. "So, you're moving up in the world, huh? Gonna trade in that old truck for a sports car soon," one joked. Jack forced a laugh, but inside he was boiling. He hated being seen as if he was using Elena for her money. That night, Jack sat on his porch after putting Sophie to bed. When Elena pulled up, he didn't greet her with his usual calm smile. Instead, his face was tense. "You've seen the news?" he asked flatly. Elena sighed, sitting beside him. "Of course. They'll write anything to sell a story." Jack shook his head. "It's not just stories. It's my life. Sophie's life. Do you know what people at her school might say? Do you know what she'll hear when other kids repeat what their parents read?" Elena's heart ached. "Jack, I never wanted this to hurt you or Sophie. But we can't let strangers decide what we mean to each other." Jack looked at her, his eyes filled with conflict. "That's easy for you to say. You've lived in the spotlight your whole life. You know how to handle it. Me? I don't want Sophie dragged into that world. She's just a little girl. She deserves to be protected. His words cut deep, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Elena knew what the spotlight could do. She had endured years of judgment, rumors, and lies. But Jack was right. Sophie didn't deserve that. For the next few days, Elena kept her distance. She threw herself into work, attending meetings and pretending everything was fine. But at night, when she returned to her empty penthouse, the silence felt louder than ever. She missed Sophie's laughter. She missed Jack's steady presence. She missed the feeling of being part of something real. Jack tried to convince himself it was for the best. He told himself Elena's world was too complicated, too dangerous for him and Sophie. But every time Sophie asked, "When will Elena come back?" he felt his resolve weaken. His daughter wasn't just fond of Elena, she adored her. And truth be told, so did he. One evening, Sophie was drawing again at the kitchen table. Jack glanced at her paper and saw 3 stick figures holding hands. He recognized them instantly. Him, Sophie, and Elena. His chest tightened. He wanted to protect his daughter, but he also wanted her to have the happiness that picture showed. A week later, Elena made a choice. She was tired of hiding, tired of letting fear control her. She attended a press conference about the housing project, and when a reporter smugly asked about her new charity case, she didn't dodge the question. With cameras flashing, Elena looked straight into the crowd and said clearly, "Jack is not a charity case. He is a hard-working father, a man I admire, and someone I care about deeply. I will not apologize for that." Her words made headlines within hours. Some mocked her, others called her bold. But Elena didn't care. For once, she wasn't speaking as a billionaire protecting her image. She was speaking as a woman standing up for what mattered to her. When Jack saw the footage that night, his heart pounded. He hadn't expected her to do that, for him, for Sophie. She had risked her reputation in front of the entire world, not to defend her company, but to defend them. Later that evening, Elena drove to his house. Jack opened the door, still unsure what to say. But before he could speak, Sophie ran up, wrapping her arms around Elena's waist. "I knew you'd come back," she said happily. Elena hugged her tightly, then looked at Jack. "I don't care what the world says. I care about you. I care about Sophie. That's enough for me." Jack stared at her, the walls he had built around his heart slowly crumbling. He saw the sincerity in her eyes, the same sincerity that had pulled him toward her from the beginning. And for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a mistake. Still, he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The gossip wouldn't stop. The criticism would continue. But as he watched Elena laugh with Sophie, something inside him shifted. Maybe love wasn't about avoiding struggles. Maybe it was about facing them together. And though neither of them said it out loud, both Jack and Elena knew this was a turning point. Their lives were no longer separate worlds colliding. They were starting to become one. Life didn't magically turn easy after Elena's public declaration. In fact, for a while, it got harder. The media continued buzzing with gossip. Some painted her as a hopeless romantic blinded by fantasy, while others accused Jack of being a gold digger. Business partners whispered behind closed doors, and her advisors begged her to be reasonable. But Elena had made her choice. For the first time in her life, she wasn't letting money, power, or reputation dictate what her heart wanted. And what it wanted was simple: Jack and Sophie. Jack, though still cautious, felt something shift inside him. The woman he once thought untouchable had stood before the world and defended him. He couldn't ignore that. She hadn't run when things got messy. She had stayed, and she had fought. For a man who had spent years bracing himself for loss, that meant everything. Their lives slowly began to blend. Elena no longer just visited the construction site as a benefactor. She came as part of their small circle. She and Sophie baked cookies one weekend, though most of the dough ended up on Sophie's nose. Another time, Jack taught Elena how to swing a hammer, laughing when she missed the nail more times than she hit it. Bit by bit, Elena's polished world softened. She traded boardrooms for school plays, gala dinners for evenings on Jack's porch. Her phone buzzed with endless emails, but sometimes she left it inside just to listen to Sophie's giggles or to watch Jack's quiet smile under the stars. Jack, in turn, began to believe in something he hadn't in a long time, a future that was bigger than just survival. Elena pushed him gently, encouraging him to think about his own dreams. When he mentioned once, almost shyly, that he had ideas for starting his own construction company, she didn't laugh. She looked at him like she believed in him more than he believed in himself. But what truly sealed it was Sophie. Children have a way of seeing the truth that adults often overlook. One evening, as Elena helped tuck her into bed, Sophie whispered, "I like when you're here. Daddy smiles more when you are." Elena felt her throat tighten. She kissed Sophie's forehead and whispered back, "I like being here too." Still, doubts lingered. One night, Jack sat with Elena after Sophie had fallen asleep. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that made every word feel heavier. "Are you sure about this?" he asked softly. "You could have anyone, someone who doesn't come with my struggles, my past. Someone easier." Elena reached for his hand, her voice steady. "Jack, I've had everything money can buy. None of it compares to what I feel when I'm here. I don't want easy. I want real. And this," she gestured toward the house, toward Sophie's room, "this is real." Jack looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't argue. He simply pulled her into his arms, holding her as though letting go would mean losing something he could never replace. Over time, the noise from the outside world began to fade. People moved on to other headlines, other scandals. Elena's business stayed strong, proving that love didn't make her weaker. It made her braver. Jack found new confidence, too, starting to explore his dream of running his own company. He no longer felt like he was living in Elena's shadow, because she never treated him that way. To her, he wasn't just a construction worker. He was the man who had saved her that stormy night and kept saving her in quiet ways ever since. Months later, the housing project was finally complete. Families moved into homes they could afford, laughter echoing through the streets, where once there had been only dust and noise. Elena stood with Jack and Sophie as they watched the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Reporters were there, but this time, Elena didn't care. She felt Jack's hand squeeze hers and Sophie's small fingers wrapped around the other, and she knew this was what she had been searching for all along. That evening, as the sun set over the finished homes, Sophie tugged on Jack's sleeve. "Daddy, does this mean we're like a family now?" Jack froze for a second, glancing at Elena. She smiled, her eyes glistening. Jack knelt down and looked at Sophie, his voice tender. "Yes, sweetheart. We are a family." Sophie grinned and hugged them both tightly, as if she had known it all along. Elena's heart swelled with a warmth she couldn't put into words. She had spent years building towers of glass and steel, chasing numbers and headlines. But here, standing with Jack and Sophie, she realized she had finally built something that mattered. Not a company, not an empire, a home. And as Jack kissed her gently, the world around them faded away. It didn't matter what anyone else thought. They had faced the whispers, the doubts, the struggles. They had chosen each other, and in doing so, they had discovered that true wealth wasn't measured in money, but in love. For Elena, the billionaire who once had everything but felt nothing, and Jack, the single dad who thought his heart was done with love, this was the second chance they never expected, but had been brave enough to take. And this time, neither of them planned to let it go.